Hey all, it's Tony the Fuzz, Fuzzy, the Fuzz, Fuzzy Games, whatever you want to call me. Today I'm going to be giving you a pretty basic caster guide for Project Ascension. Largely I'll be going over the spells you'll want to take at first level, then spells you'll want to take further down the road as you're leveling. So, you're level 1 and you have the dealer's draft deck. The first thing you're going to want to do is determine what build you want to run, and then choose the spells that are necessary for that build accordingly. For example, if you want to run a Smite build, you're definitely going to want to take Smite at level 1. Beyond that, though, there are some abilities at level 1 that are really good for casters at endgame for PvE just in general. At level 1, there are 5 spells I'm going to definitely recommend checking out and taking if you can fit them into your build. There's one spell amongst these that I would honestly say you need to take as a caster, and that spell is Life Tap. So Life Tap is a mana regeneration ability that allows you to trade HP for mana. This allows you to stay topped up on mana in between pulls or even during bosses by weaving Life Tap in between spells. The second spell I'm going to really recommend you check out is Summon Imp. Summon Imp not only provides you with a little imp that follows you around and throws fireballs at your enemies, but you can talent into imp so that it increases your spell power by the amount of intellect of your summoned beast. And the imp has the highest amount of intellect out of any of the summoned beasts, so you're really getting a lot of bang for your buck here. If you're running a fire build, you can actually spec into Imp in the Master Demonologist talent to allow you to increase your fire spell power and fire critical strike rating by 5% for 5 talent essence invested, which is super duper good for any fire build. The third spell I recommend taking is Fade. Fade allows you to drop threat. This is super useful for when you're in combat and you're doing a lot of DPS and you pull off the tank. Just quickly press Fade and it'll go straight back to attacking the tank. The downside to this talent is that it is an epic ability. So if you're high rolling or trying to high roll other epic abilities, you've lost one slot for Fade. However, I still recommend it in most cases. The following 2 spells I only really recommend if you're trying to high roll a lot of epic abilities and don't want to take Fade. Those abilities are Arcane Intellect and Blessing of Wisdom. Not super exciting, but they can be good abilities to take, especially if you want to buff your imp or buff yourself or buff party members. They're just good utility skills. Not super exciting, but there you go. While leveling, there are a whole bunch of spells I recommend you check out. I've broken these spells down into a couple of different categories. Cooldowns, threat drops, armors, weapon enchants, mana regeneration spells, and pets. Some of these spells are only really useful for specific builds, but I thought I'd include them anyways just for completion's sake. For cooldowns, there are a couple of spells that all casters want to take, and there are a couple of spells that are really specific to specific builds. The first spell that almost all casters are going to want to take is Power Infusion. And Power Infusion increases your casting speed by 20% and reduces the mana cost of all spells by 20% for 15 seconds. Incredible spell, especially if you're a caster and not a channeler, right? Or a dot build. The second one is Icy Veins. Icy Veins also increases your spellcasting speed by 20%, but it also reduces the pushback suffered from damaging attacks while casting by 100%. This makes it a better ability for PvP, but it also is super good for PvE. The third cooldown that all casters should try to take if they can is the almighty Arcane Power. Arcane Power just flat out increases the damage you deal with spells, but it also increases the amount of mana they cost. This, in conjunction with Power Infusion, is amazing, and you can actually macro them so that you can use each of them with just a single press of a button. Incredible. I love this spell. Probably my favorite cooldown of the list. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, we're going to talk about threat drops. I already talked about Fade, so I'm not going to go into Fade again, but if you're leveling and you didn't pick Fade at first level, definitely something to look for at higher levels. But the best threat drop in the game, Feign Death. An incredible spell. And it also is just kind of cool because you like fall to the ground and you look dead, but you're not dead. It's really useful not only for dropping threat in raids, dungeons, all that, but it's also useful for when you're farming and you pull too large of a pack. I can tell you I really wish I had Feign Death. I've been re-rolling to try to get it, but haven't gotten so lucky. So if you do find it, and I believe it's at level 20 that you get the option to start seeing it, definitely take it. Moving on to armors. There are 4 armors you're going to want to take a look at. And these armors are all rare abilities, so you have a pretty good chance of seeing at least one of them, if not 2 of them. These abilities come from the Mage tree, the Warlock tree, and the Priest trees. The first spell I really recommend taking a look at is Mage Armor. Mage Armor allows 20% of your mana regeneration to continue while casting, which is really good, especially in Ascended raiding where you're, running out of mana pretty quick because these fights are super long. It's something I would recommend taking if you already have another one of these abilities that I'll get into in a minute. The second spell to take a look at is Molten Armor, which converts your spirit to crit, which is great. It also has an effect where you do damage to combatants that hit you in combat, which is good for tanks, but what you're really looking at as a caster is crit. The thing is, Mage Armor and this spell and Molten Armor are both Mage Armors. You can only use one Mage Armor, so pick whichever you think is better for your build. Now, my favorite of the armors is Fel Armor. Fel Armor turns your spirit into hit rating, and hit rating is really hard to get for a caster. I'll go into hit cap in another video, but for now, just know that Fel Armor is super duper good. The final armor to take a look at is Inner Fire, and Inner Fire is kind of good. It's really just if you're really looking to optimize your build because it gives you 10 spell power at max level, which is solid. I mean, 10 spell power is nothing to scoff at, but it's not an incredible boost to your character. And now we're on to weapon enchants, which are pretty exciting. I think they're cool. A lot of them come from the Shaman tree, which is something interesting to think about. The first one I'm going to talk about is Flame Tongue Weapon, which is generally considered the best of the weapon enchants because it's pretty applicable to all casters. It just increases your spell power by a set number based on the level of the spell. Really good. And it also does fire damage when you attack people with it, but as a caster, you're probably not attacking people with your weapon, so, that part of it isn't that interesting. The next one is Firestone. Firestone requires a soul shard generator, so it's a little harder to get. It's also blue. These are all blue spells, with the exception of one that I'll get into in a second. But Firestone increases your crit rating and increases your damage, your spell damage by a little bit. This one's really good. This is actually the one that I use. It's really good for crit-based builds, so things like the Soulfire build, the Consumed by Fire build, Twilight Paragon, stuff like that. Then we have Spellstone, which is really just for dot builds. It isn't used that often, but it is good. It's solid. I've never actually used Spellstone, but people like it. Then you have Frostbrand, which is really has a lot of applications. It increases your frost spell power by a lot, so if you're running a frostbolt build, this is definitely something to look out for. Otherwise, it's not that interesting unless you're like a paladin. Paladins like it because it slows things down. It's pretty good for melee, honestly. Maybe not as good as Rockbiter or Wind Fury, but it's solid for melee. Next, we have mana regeneration abilities. These are incredibly important, and I would normally recommend taking 2 of them. Normally, you'll take Life Tap at level 1, as I mentioned earlier, but 1 in addition to Life Tap is super important as well for late game PvE content. The first one we're going to take a look at is Innervate. Innervate is an instant cast, and it just regenerates a ton of your mana. Super dope, arguably the best one out of all of these. I personally have it and use it. It's really good for raid encounters. It's really good for basically any content you can think of where you're running out of mana. The next is Evocation, which is a mage spell. This is channeled, so it's not as good as Innervate in my opinion for PvE because it's a little... It takes you out of combat, so you're doing less deeps. And we're all about the DPS here. We're all about those meters. I don't care about anything else. I don't care about literally anything else. But yeah, Evo's pretty good. Pretty solid. Then you have Mana Gems, which are really good. There's also an epic RE that turns Mana Gems into a cooldown that increases your haste rating by a little bit, so that's pretty good. But Mana Gems just... they're essentially health potions that you can create whenever you want, and they actually increase. They restore a lot of mana, so they're really good. Life Tap, like I mentioned before, super useful. Arguably the best amongst these because of its wide application. And then I included Water Shield here. Dude, I don't even think you should take Water Shield, but it's okay. It just increases flat mana regeneration, makes it okay, I guess. Finally, on this guide, we have pets. I mentioned before Imp. Imp's super good for fire builds and for casters in general, but there's another summoned beast that is super good for shadow builds, and that is Summon Succubus. Summon Succubus, when talented into, increases your shadow damage. This is the same talent as the ones that fire builds want to talent into, Master Demonologist. But yeah, it's super good for them, just straight up. And you get a Succubus that follows you around, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. And well, boys, that's it. That's the end of this video. I will make more guides, specifically endgame caster guides about hit rating, enchants, all that good stuff in the future. But until then, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Discord or in my in-game on my tune Aradox. Arraddox, I believe. Who knows if that's actually how you spell it. But anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day, and if you don't enjoy the rest of your day, I'm sorry. That really sucks. Later.